All right, hello everybody. I'm just going to give you a quick intro while everybody gets seated and everything. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for this awesome turnout. I think this is one of the coolest panels here and one of the biggest issues that Southern California and the rest of the Southwest faces. How on earth are we all going to share the Colorado River? My name is Will Huntsberry. I'm a senior investigative reporter with Voice of San Diego. We put this thing on. We do our best to hold public officials accountable and to try to help you understand how to interact with your government in ways that will make a difference and an impact, and that's what today is all about. Also, we really love it when you give us money, too. I have a very long list of sponsors, and we love them all equally for supporting civic affairs. They are the College of Arts and Sciences at USD, AARP, Burnham Center for Community Advancement, the San Diego County Water Authority, the San Diego Foundation, Atlantis, California American Water, Cox, I don't know who some of these are, but I do love them, San Diego Housing Federation, Burnham Moore Center for Real Estate at USD's Now School of Business, Planned Parenthood, Hitsky Development, Climate Action Campaign, Novo Brewing, and KPBS. I saw Andrew Bowen out there somewhere. What's up? So take it away.
Thanks very much, Will. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to PolitiFest 2023. I'm MacKenzie Elmer. I'm the environment reporter for Voice of San Diego. I cover water in the Colorado River. And if you were here for the previous discussion, you learned about California's biggest water deal, which all had to do with San Diego securing more Colorado River water in order to grow into our sprawling metropolis that we are today. And I think that's the first point to make here for this particular panel, the future of the Colorado River. If you haven't noticed, the United States kind of turns into a desert west of the Rocky Mountains. Yet we have these huge cities like Las Vegas, Phoenix, Los Angeles, and not to mention multi-billion-dollar agricultural industries in Arizona and California, growing all kinds of produce year-round using the desert sun. So none of this would exist today without the Colorado River. And if you don't know how it works, basically the Colorado River is fed by snowpack in the Rocky Mountains, and it flows, or it used to flow, all the way to the Gulf of California and Mexico. And we've engineered these massive pipes and canals and pumped water over mountain ranges to get it where it needs to go. And it took years of legal and political battles to get states and Mexico to agree on how to divvy up that river water, because water equals development, growth, and expansion. Except there's this big sticking point everyone needs to know about. The original dudes yes, they were all dudes, that split up the river, gave everyone the right to draw more water than the river actually contains. So we started this whole westward expansion on some kind of bad math. And then in the late 1990s, we started really experiencing some massive, long, grueling droughts. And we made a bunch of hard-fought deals, especially between Arizona and California. And that was using more water than its share, or California was, and we tried to get them to use less. And so we had to make all these agreements and how we were going to get through all of these different droughts. And so now basically, all of those deals that we made during that time, they sort of expire in 2026. This is this big, scary date that we're facing. And somehow the federal government is hoping that all 7 states and Mexico eventually will voluntarily compromise on how to use much less water than we're using now. So here today we have some very important people who are in charge of making these decisions. Representing California on the panel today, we have Adel Hagekhalil. He's the general manager of the Metropolitan Water Authority of Southern California. And he joined us today. And we actually have 2 replacing one of our other panelists that you may have seen on the schedule. We also have J.B. Hamby, who is the chairman of the Colorado River Board, is what we're saying? Okay, yes. And then also a district representative from the Imperial Irrigation District.
Not wearing that hat, but yeah.
Right. And then we also have Jeff Kightlinger, who is the retired general manager of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. And he also is here today sort of representing the Imperial Irrigation team. He now works for, it's kind of spicy that you're here today, but represents Acequia Consulting, and he's a consultant for Imperial Irrigation District. And we also have Brenda Burman, the general manager of the Central Arizona Project. She was appointed in January. And I'm also really stoked to have you here because you formerly served as the commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation, and you're the first woman to do so, I think, since they were all men since 1894 until you, so that is pretty... 1902, okay, so that was pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah, snaps for women on water. So, I would like to start with let's look at the task ahead of all of you guys who are at the table a lot for negotiating Colorado River water. So the federal government has asked us all to use less Colorado River water. Could maybe Jeff start off and kind of put that into perspective for me? Like, how much less water do we actually need to use? We started off with some bad math. How much less do we need to use now to keep the river going?
Happy to do it, and thank you, MacKenzie. And for any of you who got up close to see MacKenzie's badge, It says catastrophe reporter. Yeah. And I was going,
unofficially, but officially.
I don't think it's really a catastrophe on the Colorado River. We are working to solve the problem, but it is a tremendous problem. When she mentioned it was over-allocated, in the very beginning, from the outset, the states divided up 15 million acre feet, thinking that was about right. Later on, we gave another 1.5 million acre feet to Mexico as part of a treaty. We didn't take into account evaporation. So you basically spoke for dividing up somewhere around 18 million acre feet on a river that back then was producing 14 million acre feet, and right now is producing about 11 or 12 thanks to climate change, and it's shrinking. And
Jeff, could you also stop and what's an acre feet or foot? How much
an
water
acre
is that?
foot, we don't use gallons in our business. When I was at Metropolitan, we served 2 billion gallons a day. So when people start talking gallons, we go, well, X trillion. So we use acre foot. An acre foot is a farming reference to water. It's an acre of land, 1 foot deep in water. And this part's a little odd. It's about 326,000 gallons. So when we talk about millions of acre feet, you multiply that by 326,000 gallons and you get that many trillion gallons. It serves, 1 acre foot serves about 3 households for an entire year. So you're talking big amounts of water. The Colorado River is producing, though, less than it used to, and that's thanks to climate change, and we're using more than it. We are using probably about 1.5 million acre feet more than is coming in every year. Well, obviously not sustainable. We've been drawing down the reservoirs, and now Brenda's old department, the Bureau of Reclamation, is basically telling us, the states, figure it out. How are you going to stop using 1.5 million acre feet? That's a massive amount of water to cut. Look at the whole of Nevada gets 330,000 acre feet a year. Arizona gets 2.8 million acre feet a year. And we're gonna find 1.5 million acre feet to reduce. That's hundreds of thousands of acres of farming. That's millions of people's water that we have to figure out a way to collaboratively somehow make that reduction and make it stick. So it's a monumental task. We need to come up with it, as you said, by 2026. So all the states are working, they're negotiating, they're trying to figure this out. And it's gonna be the hardest. There's been a lot of hard negotiations on the river. This is gonna be the hardest one that's ever happened.
Thank you very much. And so why is 2026 such an important year on the Colorado River? Brenda, maybe could you jump in and explain, it seems like not that far away, especially in terms of how long it usually takes to make water deals on the Colorado River, which is decades often.
Thanks, MacKenzie. I think you did a good job of setting us up in the beginning. So back in the year 2000, our major infrastructure, and on the Colorado River, our forebears had the vision to put in major infrastructure. So we have Hoover Dam and Lake Mead, we have Glen Canyon and Lake Powell, and together, along with all the other reservoirs, they hold more than 4 times the average flow of the river. Now maybe getting closer to 5 times the average flow. If you look at any other river in the system, say the Sacramento or either the Columbia, Rio Grande, they don't come even close. Most of them don't even have storage for 1 year. So we've had this great system that can hold water when it's wet and then deliver it when it's dry. But what we did is back in the year 2000, we were basically full. Like the 90s had been fairly wet. We had full reservoirs. And then it started to do something we hadn't really seen before. Like there had been dry periods on the river in the recorded record, like particularly back in the 1950s. But it went really dry. 2002 was the driest year any of us had ever seen in our lives or in the recorded record. And it kept getting drier. And we lost half the reservoirs, like 50%. None of us had ever seen 50%. You know, that was back when they were filling, they were 50%. And it scared everyone. Like they realized, like we are in drought. And so the 7 basin states came together and a number of other interests, some who I see in this room, and put together a plan with the United States to say, we need to have shortage criteria. We didn't have any rules for shortage at the time. And that was the 2007 guidelines. But the problem with the 2007 guidelines, one, they'd never done it before, so they said, we're gonna do this for 20 years. This is not an experiment, but we're gonna learn from it. It's about looking at operations between Lake Powell and Lake Mead, how we, if the reservoirs drop, how do we take reductions between our states? But at that point, we were in a 2007 year drought, and we thought that was the worst we'd ever seen. We were talking about climate change, but we didn't really have all the science behind it. But here we are, in 2023, we are in 23 years of drought. We exacerbated by climate change. The river has dropped, the average of the river has dropped, but those rules run out at the end of 2026. And so we need a whole new scheme of how to run the river. Or some people might say, no, just do the same thing, just tweak it a little bit. But that's the big question in front of us. So we do wish we'd started earlier. But we've been working together very closely, through the teens into the 20s. We've all been working on how do we shore up Lake Mead, because we've realized we need more and more water to do that.
Right, and as I started 3 years ago trying to report on this massive issue that's very complicated with lots of history, I learned that Lake Mead is kind of like this thermometer on the river, right? And that's kind of what's been baked into these agreements you just talked about. To kind of recap, that the level of Lake Mead kind of determines like, the reservoir drops to X amount, and that literally triggers different states or like whole cities have to use less water, and even Mexico. And I think, wasn't it last year that the drought got so bad that it was the first time you really had to trigger these like rules you guys all agreed to on how people would cut their water use during drought? I mean, Mexico had to reduce its use, which is, I just wanted to sideline on that. We don't have Mexico or the American Indian tribes represented on this panel. Let me just make note of that.
Or Nevada.
Yes, or Nevada. Thanks to Southwest doing what it does best. It delayed our John Ensminger from Las Vegas and Southern Nevada Water Authority from being with us today. But so anyway, back to this sort of like thermometer situation. And so that's what expires in 2026. You guys all agreed to how you're gonna use less water, and now you're gonna have to kind of do it again, basically?
Yes, I think there's a lot of creative ideas out there. There's a lot of people trying to work together, because in some ways, the current guidelines and rules worked in that, well, we haven't gone into crisis. But a year ago, we were really close. And we've been realizing really since around 2013 that all the modeling and future looking and prognostications we made in 2007, they just weren't good enough. The river keeps getting smaller. And so right now we do look at the elevation. We look at the elevation of Lake Powell and Lake Mead. What will it be on January 1st of every year? And that's what the rule is for the whole year. So in 2023, we're in a Tier 2A drought. In Arizona, what that has meant is we took 592,000 acre-foot reduction. No one paid us any money for that. We took that hit. We shut down water to agriculture in an entire county. That's over 100,000 acres. Some of them had groundwater, some were able to make some deals with cities to move some water around, but we cut off water to agriculture in 2023. And that's not an easy thing to do. These are not easy decisions we're facing. whether it's the future or how we're handling it right now. But what's incredible about 2023 is we have known, we've made significant steps, whether it's in 2019, drought contingency plans, this last year, we've all come together and put forward really massive amounts of water to help protect Lake Mead and to help protect really our future, because we all depend on Lake Mead and the Colorado River.
Right, and that's where this kind of got really interesting in the last year. Is we had this huge, massive drought that everybody was freaking out. We had, everybody was already taking cuts. Arizona taking huge cuts, and another really important piece of this, how this all functions on the Colorado River, is the law of the river, right? The compact that back in 1922 to then eventually Arizona, like 17 years later or something, 22 years later, everybody signed on to this agreement that said, who gets cut, who has rights to water for the longest period of time. Maybe JB, you can jump in and explain, because Imperial Irrigation District, for instance, or Imperial Valley, they have some of the senior water rights in the Colorado River. So Arizona has to take a huge cut when there's a drought. Their farmers may have to suffer, but Imperial Valley, for the way this law is set up, their farmers do not. And so we had this huge drought, and states had to come together to try to make some sort of voluntary plan, right, on how to deal with the water. Can someone jump in and talk about what happened there, and maybe the Imperial Valley would be a good one for you?
Yeah, happy to bring my California hat as the representative for the state. So last June, the Reclamation Commissioner, Camille Tootin, met with the lower basin states here in San Diego and said, we have a problem. We need the lower basin, or the basin as a whole, to cut 1.5 to 3 million acre feet, basically in 60 days. Come up with a plan.
That's easy. Yeah, easy enough.
As you heard from the prior panel, coming up with 800,000 acre feet a year of practically in perpetuity reductions for California was a huge deal. Now trying to do that on an interstate basis between the 7 basin states and do it basically in less than 2 months, that was a tall task. So the states at that point were not able to come up with that. A few weeks later, after that meeting, there was testimony in Congress. She said, we need 2 to 4 million acre feet, which was a little bit of a jump. And so the states worked feverishly trying to hammer out some agreements. There was obviously some difference of views and perspectives on how to come up with that, and the states were not able to make an agreement at that time. She still said, we really do need a deal. California and California's agencies, being the Imperial Irrigation District, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, Coachella Valley Water District, and the Palo Verde Irrigation District, all came together and said, hey, this really is important. If we don't have a plan between the lower basin states, we are on a crash course to a point where you get to something called dead pool at Lake Mead, where you draw down the reservoir to such a low elevation that you physically cannot pass water through the dam. That means agricultural communities like the Yuma Valley or the Imperial Valley, no water. The Mexicali Valley, or the pipe that goes up to Tijuana, no water at all. Metropolitan's aqueduct empty, and the CAP empty as well. That was a non-starter. So California's agencies came together and said, we're willing to step up 400,000 acre feet for the end of these, for the duration of these current guidelines. Our hope was that would spur the other states to step up with some of these efforts as well. The Congress last year, due to Senator Sinema's efforts and leveraging that 50-50 position in the Senate and her sort of tie-breaking thing there, was able to get $4 billion for Western drought, really targeted for the Colorado River Basin. Unfortunately, we only were able to count to 1 out of the 7 basin states at that time. And so the commissioner said, we really are serious about this. The hydrology is not getting any better. So she set forward this SEIS process, Supplemental Environmental Impact Statement, to basically take those rules from 2007 that are set to go until 2026, open them up and revise them, and said, we would really like a consensus between the states.
And basically, just because there's a lot of terminology here, that I almost tried to create a key so we could follow along with different acronyms, but that
the new ones are being made every day.
It looked messy, yeah. So SEIS, basically what they said, right, was the federal government was like, okay, drought's really bad. We have 2026 coming up where we're gonna all make new rules, but to get us through, because there's literally not enough water for everybody, let's come up with a temporary plan, and that's what this SEIS situation is, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
that was the intent, to really tell the states we're serious and we're coming up with it. We'd like to have that consensus framework, and this is the way the Colorado River has been managed for the last 20 years. Starting in 2001, there was a plan to divvy up the surplus, and then 2007 it was shortage. 2019 DCP, it was even worse situation, and this was even worse, even worse. So she asked basically from December through January to come up with a plan, and unfortunately, where we ended up at that point is we had the other 6 basin states come up with a consensus approach, which we disagreed that the idea of consensus is not having one included in that.
Yeah, that was a pretty spicy moment, right? Where the 6 basin states, there's 7 of them, right? There's Colorado, Wyoming, 6, yeah, okay, 6 against
Four upper basin
right,
states.
I shouldn't have tried to list them off. But yes, 7 basin states, but everybody kind of teamed up against California in one hot moment at one point. And then, was it Imperial Valley that kind of stepped up and offered some water at one point? Maybe even Kightlinger, or Jeff can step in if you want, since you're sort of maybe also
I
representing.
mean, what we did is actually offered 400,000 acre feet as California, right?
Yeah, and so basically at that point, we had the 6 states versus California, but fortunately, once the press went wild, there was a lot of ink spilled over that period of time in January.
Yeah, I think I
which
contributed
was
to that.
less than pleasant. We were able to come back together after the newspapers stopped churning out the front page headlines, and we were able to let cooler heads prevail. And over this late winter this year and spring, we had a couple of positive developments. We had the states actually talking to each other, small groups actually having frank, open dialogue. And then it rained and snowed and rained, and we had one Pineapple Express after the other. So by basically the end of May, we were able to come up with an agreement between Arizona, California, and Nevada, what we called the Lower Basin Plan, that pledged 3 million acre feet of water from 2023 until 2026, and unprecedented historic amount of water that's going to be left at Lake Mead. Part of it's uncompensated, and part of it is compensated, and that takes into account agricultural, urban, and tribal interests throughout the lower basin.
Yeah, so to recap, we had this terrible drought leading up and everybody was getting a little tense, and then we had this miracle rain, this miracle winter, which brought unprecedented, record-breaking, record-shattering rains that sort of cooled the tension, perhaps, on the Colorado River. Oh, no? Jeff want to jump in and offer a thought there?
The only thing is, we had a respite, and a respite's good, but the trend is going down,
Yeah.
and we have to reverse the trend. And the states, particularly the lower basin states, as JB said, are working really hard to come up with a plan that would be sustainable for the future. But it's going to be incredibly hard. The people that have to live with this plan moving forward are going to be the Central Arizona Project, the Metropolitan Water District, their Imperial Valley. They're going to have to come up with a way to get reductions in water use that are going to be permanent and long-term.
We got a lifeline and we got a break, but it doesn't take the responsibility. I think we have a little more time to really develop the plan and what we need to figure that out. What does that mean? And I said it also, it's not about just cuts. We all have to collaborate on building the infrastructure. So for example, in Metropolitan, we're in a great place because Metropolitan is actually joins 2 watersheds, right? We have in the Sierras, we have the Sacramento area and State Water Project, we have the Colorado, and sometimes we have surplus. And right now, there is some water we can't even move into our area because the conveyance system is not there. Imagine if we have the conveyance system and have the other states partner with us on building the infrastructure of the future to move water. It may help us put and park more water in Lake Mead. I think part of the negotiation is expanding the storage and the intentionally created storage in Lake Mead. We cannot just cap it. We have to be able to, when we have water available to us, we need to be able to store it and not lose it. There is a lot of creative idea that have to happen to help us really shore up what we need to do. But the bottom line, we all have to go on diets, we all have to tighten, but it's not just the lower basins. Everybody should also be part of it. Smart, responsible water management should be everywhere. Urban communities also need to be protected as ag communities, and using efficiency in both and how we invest is going to be critical. And I use the term right now with the Inflation Reduction Act. We are applying for large money that will transform how we the landscaping in Southern California, as we have done in the past, but this is gonna move non-functional turf in a different place. And I use the 300,000 acre feet of water that we can save. We are building the largest recycled water project in partnership with Arizona and Nevada. We're talking to Los Angeles City about partnering and joining their project with our project and making it 300,000 acre feet of recycled water and how we can increase that. So there is a potential, but it can't be on the backs of the ratepayers in our region. It has to be part of a shared responsibility.
So yeah, I think we can unpack that in a little bit here, because you've mentioned a lot of different points there, and I think just bringing us back to kind of the timeline of how we're moving along in this process. So again, we had the drought, we had the rain, and then in the middle of all that, the federal government, you said the Inflation Reduction Act, Biden administration put billions of dollars on the table and said, okay, here's a chunk of money, we're gonna pay for conservation, we're gonna pay you guys to use less water, like, please submit applications and let us know how you would like to use this money. And so that's kind of like where we were at with the drought, where that money was maybe like a really good negotiation point, right, for working with farmers, working with the urban centers, because that's this constant tension on the Colorado River, right? Growing cities need the water, but we also have our farming communities. And so but then it rained, and we still have this money on the table. And so maybe you guys could talk about kind of like, maybe we could start with Brenda. How are you preparing to make some of these cuts, or like what kinds of ways has Arizona offered to the federal government so far, and how to conserve water, kind of going forward?
So I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the Central Arizona Project. Very good.
We got one.
We've got one. Two, I appreciate it. Let me share a little bit. So the Central Arizona Project was the product of just decades of work by Arizonans to get a project built to use our Colorado River water inside Arizona. So we have on-river communities who have been using the water for a long time, some more recent. But that project was authorized in 1968, and it's really an engineering marvel. And in some ways, almost similar if you know the Metropolitan system. We have a large aqueduct that brings water across the entire state, 336 miles. We raise water 3,000 feet in different areas to get the water to Phoenix area, through the Pinal County, down to the Tucson area. And so we deliver to the major cities of Arizona, over 80% of the population, about 6.1 million people. We used to deliver to a lot of agriculture, not so much anymore. But when you look at our system, so we have so many different interests, and I know you face similar situations probably with your own water district. What we've been looking at is, one, we have taken the first cuts. We've taken that without anyone handing us a dollar bill to do it. But we know we have this future issue. We also knew we had this interim problem. What were we going to do until 2026? We've been very lucky to have a wet year. Wet, not amazing, wet. And it was a good year. But what we also put on the table is this 3 million acre feet. And so that federal money has allowed our cities, our tribes, overwhelmingly our tribes, to step up some of our agriculture and to accept payment for water to leave behind in Lake Mead, compensated conservation. And what that does is it allows them to take that funding and invest in their own infrastructure, invest in their own conservation programs. And it's about building resiliency, like getting ready for how to live with less water. And that means different things to different communities. I know that's the same in California. LA probably has different resources than Otay. It's completely different depending where you live. So some cities have lots of different resources, groundwater, maybe local rivers. Others don't and rely completely on the Colorado River. So our job is to make sure that everyone can be more resilient, that we can learn to live with less water. And this year, just within the communities that are served by my project, we have, I think, about 300,000 acre feet on the table of new conservation this year. So it's an incredible start. A lot of that water will go away if there are deeper cuts, so it won't be there to conserve in a couple of years, perhaps.
So we're talking about a temporary cut, right? Like you're temporarily offering this big chunk of water, and how much is 300,000 acre feet to what Arizona gets normally from the Colorado River? Just put into context for everyone.
So between, I probably don't have all the numbers, our cut this year, which was 592,000 acre feet, our reduction was about 24%, I
And
think.
you just had to take that, right? Because
We
that's
just
what the
took
law of the
that,
river
that was
says.
uncompensated.
Right.
Then you throw in the compensated, so that's 900,000 divided by 2.8 million.
Okay, well, I'm not a calculator. I wish I could do that in my head. But now the point is that the federal government is able to like help pay for some of this conservation instead of just you taking it on for free.
There's two buckets. I mean, the
Yeah.
first one is conservation, but there is a second bucket, which is permanent reduction. I mean, the first one was, what's called bucket one.
Let's call it long-term.
There's long-term investments and short-term investments. One is like stop the hemorrhaging quick. The other one is how we're gonna save the patient, right? And I think to me in Metropolitan, we submitted I think it's very robust application on this bucket two, which is a long-term that includes basically converting our non-functional turf, doing direct install in communities that are disadvantaged.
What is non-functional?
Non-functional turf is actually decorative grass. Our friends, if John was here, he will tell you how much they've done in Nevada, in Vegas. But really, it's taken this effort. There's Assembly Bill 1572 that's on the governor's desk to sign for us to mandate that we don't water non-functional turf. So if the turf is only for decorative purposes, only to be just mowed by a gardener, not to be used by animals or kids, that's non-functional, and we want to convert that. So we think by our investments that we can actually create 300,000 acre feet permanently in savings. We're looking at direct install for disadvantaged communities where there are some communities in our region that haven't been able to access rebates, and we want to go and do it. We're creating more local water supply, stormwater efforts. There's communities, I'll give you an example of a community in Central Basin. 5 cities have access to groundwater rights, but they don't have the infrastructure to extract water and use it. We are actually, as part of this offer, is we're gonna go in and build the infrastructure to give them access to their groundwater rights, and that would now allow us to save that water they use from doing it, but also just the recycled water program and some of the stuff. So we put on the table a robust offer, I think an ask of $400 million for 20. It's also very holistic and doing it. I want to add to, I think what Brenda said, is Southern California, and you guys can take pride in it, we actually were able to put 2 million acre feet of water in Lake Mead over the years, about 20 feet of additional elevation that deferred a lot of these cuts. I mean, I think we deferred a lot of this pain that we're going through by our actions through conservation. So without being compensated for it, we put it in and almost, it's part of our storage and what we put in to use. So to me, I think we need to think differently and in this collaborative effort, building the infrastructure to move water and provide flexibility. We are doing a storage system in Antelope Valley that we're doing the ribbon cutting this month that's gonna put 300,000 acre feet in storage and do 70,000 acre feet of take. That is a huge benefit to everyone in the region. So we're gonna be doing a lot of that stuff, and we need to talk about how we can all partner in it.
Right. So this money from Biden kind of helped spur some innovative ideas that haven't yet been granted the funding, right? We're still you guys are still waiting to hear what the federal government will agree to help pay for in order to conserve water, correct? I mean,
So there's the short-term and the long-term investment. The short-term investment, those have mostly been signed in Arizona, so that water is being saved in 2023. And some of our deals are more straightforward than the ones in California, so they're still negotiating. But the long-term deals, yes, we're waiting. People put in their applications in August, and we're waiting to see kind of what happens with the federal government.
yeah, I wanted to touch on Imperial Irrigation District, Imperial Valley here, and also the uniqueness of this panel. We have, Jeff Kightlinger, the former Metropolitan GM, and we have the current GM, which I appreciate you both being here. And in your retirement, you're now sort of consulting or working with Imperial Valley. And Imperial Valley is, as we know, if you've stuck around for the last panel, very powerful in the Colorado River, very, very powerful agricultural community that has rights, senior rights, or basically like they're one of the last to get cut if there's a drought, whereas Arizona has to take on shoulder a lot of cuts. It's just how the way the law works. So if you could talk about if you could talk about kind of like what Imperial Valley is working with the federal government on in terms of conservation in this short term, or is there may be some more long-term conservation on the table?
You know, the basic premise of Western water law was always first in time, first in right. And the farmers got here first, and they were farming first before the cities began to grow. So they have the senior water rights, and that's the 101 principle. And so as we work through this principle of reducing water, typically the junior water rights, which historically have been the cities and urban interests, have been the ones on the reduction line. And then they have turned around and sort of said, well, we've got millions of people here. We think the farmers should give more, and you have this tension that's been going on for quite a while. And what you heard the last panel really talked about was how the whole QSA in California was to work out agriculture to urban transfers, with the urban sectors paying money for the agriculture sectors to grow more efficiently and move that water. Obviously a lot of friction, a lot of pain, but eventually a market-type solution was able to be effectuated, and we've had 20 years of implementation that has worked pretty well for California. We reduced our water usage by 800,000 acre-feet, ag to urban, moving that water, and the biggest mover of that water was the Imperial Valley. They are moving about 500,000 acre-feet of water. If you look at their math, they were using about 3 million acre-feet. They're using 500,000 less, and still remarkably growing the same amount of produce, all through efficiency. That water's coming to San Diego, it's coming to LA. And that is a success story. Now, we're being asked to repeat it. Well, they picked all the low-hanging fruit. They picked all the obvious things. We lined the canals, we built the systems, and now the idea of repeating it is now going to get really hard, really have to really drill down into it. And so, the people of Imperial Valley are looking at how much more can we do? Again, and the urban sectors, how much more can we pay for? But it has to get done. And so that's why we're out here working it, and that's what the Imperial folks are taking a hard look at. So the kind of things they're looking at in these bucket 2 processes are the really next tier of really getting into smaller, not the easy things of just lining a quick earthen canal, but now getting into very sophisticated, capturing water at the end of the farm, pumping it back up, using it. A lot of infrastructure built on farms, a lot more effort into it, laser leveling, all the equipment that you want to do with a very high-tech farming. They've been doing a lot of it, shifting to drip irrigation on every inch. All of that's been happening, and now it's going to have to happen even more, and on steroids, so to speak.
Yeah, right. And we're still only talking about this temporary fix. We've just spent the last 15 minutes talking about getting us through these next 2 years, and that's what that federal money is on the table for. And now, we haven't even gotten to the 2026 negotiations, which...
Some of it will be permanent, which will help the 26, but the 26 they'll move on, but the 26 negotiations are gonna have to just do that much more, and that's the hard part.
Can somebody put into context, do we know how much water the federal government's asking us to really cut for 2026 and beyond?
Yeah, so the Fed certainly last year, when we were looking like we were going to reach critical elevations at Lake Mead and Lake Powell, they put
so low that everybody's in trouble. That's what you mean.
they put specific numbers out at the time. At this point, we're in the early stages for our post-2026 process. So the 7 basin states, the respective lower and upper basins, and individual states put in their comments to help guide this process. So Reclamation at this point, the feds, are largely being a facilitator. They'll come out with what they're looking at, a consensus view about what this process should be and what problems we're supposed to solve. But at least at this point, the states are largely taking the lead and identifying a few issues that we're largely in consensus about. One of the core ones is achieving supply and demand balance within the basin. And that number is pretty large, at least the numbers we've been kicking around in the lower basin, to be able to solve the amount of use we have between Arizona, Nevada, California, and Mexico versus the amount of a supply that we have available to us. It's probably in the neighborhood of somewhere around 1.2 to 1.5 million acre feet per year, just under these current circumstances, looking over the last 20 years, looking into the future.
Is
But
that
now
a permanent reduction? 1.5 million?
I think Jeff hit it in the beginning where we're over, I mean, and we're talking about 11 million acre foot river. And the question is, how can you ensure that you are actually not overspending? Like you're getting your paycheck, but you're overspending, and eventually you're going to go bankrupt. And I think that's the thing is, how can we live within our means? What is that number that we need to shoot for? And how we have to make up supply or we have to reduce consumption. Yes, this is the only solution. I mean, that's basically it. And when we have rain and we have more water, how we can store it. So when we have dry conditions and at 10, 11 million acre feet in the river, we're able to make up the difference through storage everywhere. So yeah, I mean, we have to cut. I mean, that's the reality. And it's not just cut. My whole discussion is not just cuts, it's also solutions of new water supply, storage options, flexibility to move water. That's the future also to help us.
Yeah,
And
that's
to-
kind of a, oh, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, and I think another thing to put on there that complicates matters a little bit is these are the numbers that we know that we've been dealing with for the last 20 or so years, but trying to look into a future where the conditions we've been seeing in the Colorado River Basin are very erratic and constantly changing. And so there are some things that we can have some certainty about. It's largely going to be a lot hotter and drier into the future, and we should be anticipating that. But there's a lot of uncertainty in the future. So we know within a certain range of there's known knowns, but there's a lot of unknown unknowns, to use some Donald Rumsfeld phrasing, that we have to be anticipating.
Yeah, I want to talk about this data collaborative discussion we just had recently. We are actually mapping and getting, because every time you have a snowpack, the question is how much water in the snowpack. That's critical. We need to use data to know, because you can't use the history to predict the future. We need to use data. And also, we need to know how dry the condition of the earth. There is San Diego, he is doing putting monitors to know how dry the soil is in the watershed. So when we have runoff, we know how much it's going to get into our rivers and lakes. So data is going to be also something that we all have to invest in to help us model the future and know what's coming down.
Right, you got scientists up trying to measure the snowpack with like instruments. I understand, yeah, we still don't know exactly like how much water is coming into the system from the snowpack that we have all the time. So you mentioned supply, because you said it's not all about cuts. You mentioned supply. So I wanted to ask you all, are you out shopping for water, and where from? Maybe anyone?
So I think, one thing back, historically speaking, so in 1968, when the Central Arizona Project was authorized, also among a lot of other things that were put into that legislation was the federal government was given this obligation to go and generate a lot of water to help cover for Mexico and to generate augmentation. So 2023 now, 1968 has been a while. There has not been a whole lot of augmentation that's been developed, but certainly I think through this process, more recently, there's been efforts to identify some reuse, recycling opportunities, and I think folks are trying to get creative. There were, back in the past, big ideas about importing water from the Columbia Basin into the Colorado River Basin, which there were, at least another part of that legislation at the time was a ban on even talking about it for 10
And the
years.
Mississippi River, wasn't that also on the table? Like someone brought up, can we?
Great Lakes. The Great Lakes was a big target at
Which
one point.
I, as a Wisconsinite, would be very not happy about probably.
They're big. We can share them.
Yeah, I guess they are great, yeah, maybe we can.
And then they passed legislation that you can't go near them or talk about them.
Oh, okay, that's already happened? Okay, well, okay. Well, the other thing I was gonna, I didn't know if you wanted to talk about the interstate recycling project that you guys are working on.
Right now, I mean, to me, is that's where the future is. And we need to find where is the best place to do it. We're doing this Pure Water Southern California and Carson, recycling 150 million gallons a day, which is 150,000 acre feet. We're talking about also partnering with Los Angeles to join the two and get it up to 300,000 acre feet. We're looking at potentially desal in Doheny in South Orange County and how we can expand this. There's a lot of opportunities for us to do a lot of it. But who should carry the cost of this? And that's why we started this partnership. Jeff was there when we started the partnership with Arizona and Nevada. And I think what we need to open our blinders. I mean, some people say, why should I give them good water and take the bad water? I mean, there's a lot of things that we have to deal with, but the technology is so good now that we know it's proven. Orange County in our area has done amazing work with their program. In 130 million gallons a day is being recycled and put into the ground for the area where I live, getting water out. Can we now partner across the watershed? And now we're talking Arizona and Nevada, but that can be applied across the board to do that. And how we can do it to build, and maybe Mexico can build desal or some treatment of recycled water in Tijuana or along the New River or something that we can benefit from it to put water in Lake Mead and Lake Powell.
Right, well, so is that allowed right now in the way that the law of the river works? And Jeff's, yeah, jump in, Jeff, and kind of maybe, because you guys are basically, Arizona, Nevada are investing in your water recycling project in Los Angeles. That's like one form of kind of interstate collaboration, but like, is it allowed to do water trading?
Interstate transfers are not really allowed, but exchanges, so this is
What's
why
the
us
difference?
lawyers like to use, us lawyers are very good at using our words. Exchanges, on the other hand, have been allowed. So what we will seek to be doing as a group is to ensure that the agreement post-2026 builds more flexibility into it. That's something we're going to have to do. What Adel was saying is the era of the big augmentation projects where we rerouted whole lakes and rivers and moved them across multiple states, that's an era of the past. I mean, they did remarkable things last century. They're not going to be doing it the next century. Just politically and legally, they're just not going to happen. But we can do exchanges between urban sectors in Arizona and Metropolitan and Las Vegas, smaller, but but valuable. And we can do that, but we're going to have to do some of the broadening of the rules that we live by, and there's going to be acceptance to do that.
Okay. And I also, I mean, I can't help myself, but there was some big news about Arizona, and there are some foreign investors along the Colorado River. And recently, the governor of Arizona basically ended some leases that I think some Saudi investors had in some farming land. And I just wondered, are there others shopping in other states for Colorado River water? And what do you think the future is of that?
First I'll say that farming enterprise was on groundwater, and so not a part of who we deliver to or how that works. But I think that's been an issue kind of across our states where groundwater is unregulated. It allows larger industrial interests to come in and sink very deep wells that can affect local communities. I will say everything that's been happening in the desert in that area has been completely legal. There's been a lot of great investment in the local community, so that it's not an easy question. But that water in particular is not on Colorado River water.
Well, one thing I would add to that is a lot of alfalfa that's grown gets shipped to places like China, Japan, where they use it for feed and livestock. And a lot of people say, well, you're exporting water. And I think a fair thing to look at is this device here that was made in China took a lot of water into its manufacturing and then got shipped here. So we live in a very complicated world of commerce going around the world, and water is a component of it. We are going to have to rethink how we use water if it's shrinking in a climate change world. But the idea that it's somehow inappropriate to ship one product overseas but accept those in exchange different products here doesn't really work. So we're going to have to find some sort of balance on that.
But I think the type of crops that we farm and what we do and the timing of it, it's going to be something to be discussed. I mean, that's something that's important for all of us. In our partnership with BARD and the Kitsan tribe, we talked about seasonal farming, or some people call it seasonal fallowing, called seasonal farming, where they farm during the time, and during the summer, they're not going to farm because it takes the most water, and that water now is saved, and we basically pay for it, and it's put back in Lake Mead. So there's some smart ideas of what crops we use and how we do it in a smart way, and there's some things that can be done that way too.
Could I
Sure.
I just wanted to add, because you brought up some tribes we've mentioned but haven't really gone into that. So the 7 states who rely on the Colorado River, there's 30 tribes across the basin. 22 of them are in Arizona. So tribes have been a very large part of the water discussion in Arizona. For Central Arizona Project, we deliver to 12 tribes, or we serve 12 tribes. And they have been at the table and really a part of this discussion. So when we talk about resiliency and future, in our urban areas in Arizona, you have to have a 100-year water supply if you want to put in new housing, new growth. And that's not an easy thing to find. A lot of those communities have worked with the tribes and signed leases either for 100 years or for less than that. And we've traded groundwater credits. There's been a lot of innovation going on. When I look at our future for how are we going to deal with a smaller river, I think it's all tools are on the table. It's looking at how can you trade water back and forth? How can we have smarter rules so we can be more flexible with each other? I think major investments in infrastructure are definitely part of this. But I think there's a lot more tools than maybe we thought we had 20 years ago, and we're going to have to use all of them.
Right, because the history is that a lot of these tribes were given rights to water in a very short summary, but maybe weren't supported in being able to invest and build and develop any way to use this water. And so now we're at a point where finally the federal government and the states are maybe saying, okay, yeah, we need to work with you guys and actually be fair about this and have the tribes at the table. And we haven't even talked about Mexico, our neighbor to the south, and I've done a lot of reporting on that. Tijuana relies 100% on the Colorado River, and its aqueduct is not in the best shape also. So northern Mexico and its Mexicali farmers over there as well also rely on the Colorado River. So there's a whole other conversation to be had about how the United States is going to be able to negotiate with Mexico in 2026 as well, right? Because a lot of those treaties that we've already made are going to also expire in 2026. Well, sorry, elements. Please correct me. Scott, do we have some questions?
We
from the
do.
audience? Okay, great. Why don't you?
Well,
start us off?
the reason I thought they were good is there's a lot of just basic facts that people were interested in. Can anybody explain how much percentage of the water from the Colorado River is used for agriculture versus urban use? Anybody have any idea?
It depends on what state you're living in. When they report on the 7 states, they usually say about 80%. I can answer for Arizona. In Arizona, it's 70% agricultural.
Got it. Another one was, is there any idea who the biggest waster of water is? Or is there any idea of who wastes the water the most?
So I'm sure all users in the Colorado River Basin, the test in the Reclamation Act is reasonable and beneficial use. I think everyone would claim that they're all using that water reasonably and beneficially. And moving forward, post-2026, the finger pointing is not necessarily constructive. So I think we're all looking for ways to enhance our use of the water to move forward.
So Nevada then.
John's not here to defend himself, so casinos and fountains in the desert?
This is related. I think this was really interesting to me. We talked about in the previous panel about urban areas that had really become more efficient with their water use. Are we seeing that through the Colorado River Basin? Are all places using the same sort of proportionally less water as California's use?
I think we're ahead a little bit, but I think there's an agreement that we signed on, and there was an MOU with all these cities and urban cities, and signed on to implement practices of conservation, including, removing 30% of non-functional turf as part of it, and all this stuff. So there's a common understanding, and there's more people signing on to really do what we need to do, but also we need everybody to use water efficiently.
Mine?
You have another question?
Yeah, this one's really interesting to me. So we talk about the law of the river, and it's basically who got there first, right? Is that no?
There's a lot of things.
There's a lot of things, but it is this foundational law, and how does it hold up if tensions really get high? Is there any worry that a court or some kind of violence or something could shake up the law that governs how the water is used. How sacrosanct and protected is that law?
You really want to know
So-
when the guns are going to be drawn, Scott. That's what you're asking.
So the law of the river is not like Moses and the Ten Commandments. Somebody went up on top of a mountain and then they came down on, stone tablets. The law of the river is basically a compendium of Supreme Court decrees, compacts, contracts, agreements, unspoken customs of the way we behave, and they've been built layer upon layer over time. I think the development, essentially after Arizona versus California, which was the longest case in the entire history of the United States Supreme Court, the states decided that conflict is not a great path moving forward, and this tradition of collaboration, especially within the last 25 years or so, has taken to the fore here. So the law of the river, which has many different components of it, and there's equally many interpretations of what all that means, but what it provides us is the flexibility to continue to add, provide another layer, interpret things in new ways, or maybe set things aside and come up with another agreement that says, well, all that put aside, here's how we're going to operate because this is how we've achieved consensus for this at least next interim period of time.
But isn't it true that, I'm sorry, if the states disagree, it goes straight to the Supreme Court if there's some kind of an argument?
Some issues would go straight to the Supreme Court, but I think a great case study and something we should all think about is what happened in Australia. When Australia had their millennium drought of 10 years, they hit a wall and they nationalized the issue. The Australian government came in and said, we're taking over and we're changing water rights wholesale, we're changing the endangered species laws wholesale, and we're pumping in roughly 25% of their entire national, GNP into water as an issue. The whole government changed based on water. So nothing sacrosanct. We have found the ability to compromise and work things through, but at some point, if you hit a wall, the rules are going to change.
Thank you.
Well, just to kind of finish, I wasn't sure if I was going to do this or not, but Mark Twain may or may not have said that whiskey is for drinking, water is for fighting, or you drink whiskey when the fighting is over. So I brought little whiskeys for you guys. Just to maybe you guys don't have to fight, and you can just drink whiskey right now.
It's after 12.
Yeah, and I thought you and JB could. I only brought 3 because we were gonna, but you and JB can share because, you guys are kind of working on the same
sharing,
team now.
yeah.
So, anyway, thank you everyone for coming, and I really appreciate you guys so much for flying out, for just being here and working together on the stage with me. It's been really, really wonderful experience. So.
Thank you all. So right now it's lunchtime. There should be trucks if you don't have a lunch through us. If you are interested in what MacKenzie does, get her environment report at voicesandiego.org/newsletters. That's voicesandiego.org/newsletters. And we still got another half day. Thank you so much.
Can I ask you for a favor? Oh my God.